Frank Sinatra wasn't just a singer, he was a storm in a tuxedo. With a single note, he could silence a room, but behind the velvet voice was a man who never forgave and never forgot. His charm won him presidents, power players, and legends as friends. But his temper, that created enemies he carried to the grave. And among them, one man stood out above all, the one Sinatra despised more than anyone else. Frank Sinatra didn't just sing songs, he lived with a fire that could light up the stage and burn down bridges. His voice made him a legend, but his grudges made him unforgettable. Hollywood whispered about his feuds, and behind the glamour was a man who could turn charm into fury in a heartbeat. And among all his rivalries, there was one enemy he despised more than anyone else. This is the story of Sinatra's darker side, the part history doesn't always put in the spotlight. Yes, he was the man with the golden voice, the ballads, the swing songs that still echo today. But Sinatra was far more than a crooner. He was a movie star with an Academy Award, the leader of the Rat Pack, a style icon of an entire generation, and a power broker whose influence stretched from Hollywood to Washington. Yet, with all that power came battles, grudges, and a side of Sinatra that refused to play nice. Frank Sinatra's career didn't just span decades, it defined them. Everywhere he went, he carried an aura of charm, confidence, and raw force that made him impossible to overlook. But the journey to becoming an icon was anything but easy. Born in 1915 in Hoboken, New Jersey, to working-class Italian-American parents, Sinatra grew up tough, restless, and hungry for more. His voice became his escape route. By the 1940s, he wasn't just singing, he was electrifying audiences, sending teenage girls into screaming frenzies at packed concert halls. And as the years rolled on, Sinatra mastered the art of reinvention. From big band crooner to solo star, from Hollywood actor to the undisputed king of Las Vegas, he never stopped evolving. His shows didn't just draw crowds, they drew presidents, power brokers, and Hollywood royalty. By the 1960s, Sinatra wasn't just an entertainer. He was a symbol of cool, a living brand, a name that carried weight in music, film, politics, and beyond. But that polished image was only part of the story. Behind the spotlight was a man whose charisma could turn magnetic in one moment and volcanic the next. He didn't just walk into rooms, he owned them. And when things didn't go his way, the charm could vanish in an instant. He was impeccably dressed, spoke with candor, and demanded respect consistently. People gravitated towards him due to an aura that made them feel included in something extraordinary. However, his temper was infamous. Sinatra could easily become enraged, swiftly sever ties, and turn a simple disagreement into a prolonged feud. Loyalty was of utmost importance to him. Friends who remained loyal could rely on his support and kindness. If Sinatra took a liking to you, he would go above and beyond to assist you. He would cover expenses for struggling artists, provide chances to emerging talents, and defend those he regarded as family. Conversely, if he deemed you an adversary, there was nearly no way back. He held on to grievances tightly and did not forgive slights, whether they were genuine or perceived. In Hollywood and Las Vegas, this reputation became intertwined with his persona. People murmured that you never wanted to incur Frank Sinatra's wrath, as he would pursue you until you felt the repercussions. Tales of his vendettas were widespread. He could sever friendships overnight if he felt wronged. He would insist on apologies and sometimes cling to resentment for years, even decades. As one insider remarked, if Frank didn't like you, it was evident. And the entire town was aware of it, too. That was the influence he wielded. Within entertainment circles, his endorsement could either unlock opportunities or shut them down. His approval was highly sought after, but his contempt could be ruinous. A significant factor behind these grudges was Sinatra's colossal ego. He took pride in his achievements and expected to be treated with deference by everyone, from fellow artists to casino proprietors to reporters. He was acutely sensitive to criticism, and even minor comments could trigger him. Simultaneously, he thrived on rivalry. He aspired to be the top singer, the most influential entertainer, and the focal point of attention. When someone obstructed his path, overlooked him, or failed to acknowledge him appropriately, he took it to heart. Loyalty, pride, and an explosive temper, this volatile mix made Frank Sinatra a man both admired and feared. To millions of fans, he was larger than life, a figure of glamour, charm, and strength. But to those who crossed him, Sinatra was something else entirely, a relentless enemy who never forgave and never forgot. In an industry overflowing with oversized egos and endless rivalries, Sinatra's grudges were legendary. He didn't hide his disdain or keep it behind closed doors, he made it loud, clear, and unforgettable. His anger could reshape friendships, destroy business deals, and even bleed into his performances. These weren't petty squabbles, they were all-out wars fueled by the same passion that made him a star. When Sinatra despised someone, he poured every ounce of intensity into that hatred. Whether it was a fellow actor, a political powerhouse, or a rival in business, once you were on his bad side, the whole world knew it. These clashes became part of the Sinatra myth, just as defining as the music, the movies, and the sold-out Vegas shows. They exposed a side of him that was raw, dangerous, and undeniably human. And as you'll see, some of these feuds went far beyond words, they became battles that shook Hollywood itself. They evolved into some of the most notorious rivalries in Hollywood lore. Next, let's explore how tensions escalated between Sinatra and Marlon Brando. Frank versus Marlon Brando. Frank Sinatra had numerous adversaries, but few rivalries were as intense or widely discussed as his conflict with Marlon Brando. The two icons embodied entirely different facets of Hollywood. Sinatra was the refined singer-actor who thrived on efficiency, having been a star for many years by the time Brando made his entrance. Brando, on the other hand, was the younger talent regarded as a prodigy who popularized method acting. They were compelled to collaborate on the 1955 film Guys and Dolls. From the outset, their contrasting personalities sparked a clash that was electric. The lead role of Sky Masterson was a coveted part. A suave gambler with charisma and depth who performed some of the most iconic songs in the production. Sinatra had his sights set on that character. At the peak of his career, he had established himself as a box office sensation and believed he was the ideal choice for Sky. However, to his dismay, the studio awarded the role to Marlon Brando. This choice struck Sinatra hard. Brando was not recognized as a vocalist, and many doubted his capability for a musical. What Brando possessed was undeniable star power. Fresh from his Oscar-winning role in On the Waterfront, he was hailed as the most thrilling actor of his time. The studio aimed to leverage his name to attract audiences, leaving Sinatra feeling sidelined. Instead of Sky Masterson, he was assigned the role of Nathan Detroit, which he perceived as lesser, more comedic, and lacking in glamour. For someone with Sinatra's ego, it was a degrading experience. This casting decision sowed the seeds of animosity. Sinatra felt like a second choice, and he carried that bitterness onto the set. Every day on set was a reminder to Frank Sinatra that the role he coveted most was in Marlon Brando's hands, and there was nothing he could do about it. The tension only deepened once the cameras started rolling. Sinatra and Brando couldn't have been more different as actors. Sinatra worked fast. He believed in instinct, rhythm, and capturing lightning in a bottle. 1, maybe 2 takes, then move on. To him, rehearsals and endless retakes weren't art, they were a waste of time. Brando, meanwhile, was the complete opposite. As a devoted method actor, he dissected every line, tested every emotion, and demanded take after take until he felt the truth of the character come alive. To Sinatra, this wasn't genius, it was unbearable. Brando's slow, meticulous style clashed violently with Sinatra's no-nonsense approach. What Brando saw as craft, Sinatra dismissed as arrogance. He had no patience for it, no respect for it, and he made sure everyone knew. On set, he branded Brando with a mocking nickname that stuck, Mumbles. Sinatra used it constantly, sneering at Brando's quiet delivery, his improvisations, and his refusal to play the role the right way. The feud wasn't just professional, it was personal. And it was about to explode. Sinatra criticized what reviewers hailed as naturalistic acting as clumsy and annoying. Practices were frequently stressful. When Sinatra had to wait while Brando rehearsed a scene, he would publicly grumble. Members of the crew remembered how Sinatra became irate when there were too many delays. Sinatra's anger increased as Brando leaned further into his process. Acting styles were not the only thing that separated them. They represented the collision of two distinct Hollywood eras. One of the most well-known tales of their rivalry was eventually born out of the tension on set. It took place while a scene with cheesecake was being filmed. Nathan Detroit, played by Sinatra, had to consume a piece of cheesecake in order to execute his lines. This type of scenario would often be straightforward and captured on camera in a few shots. However, reports claim that Brando purposefully ruined the moment by repeatedly mispronouncing his lines, necessitating numerous retakes. Sinatra had to have another mouthful of cheesecake with every new attempt. Sinatra was initially just annoyed, but as the takes went on, his annoyance increased. Being made to repeat the same gag as his opponent purposefully stumbled pushed him to the limit because he was not known for having patience. Several retakes later, Sinatra blew up. He shouted at Brando in front of the workers, slammed his fork down, and swore loudly. Hollywood rapidly became aware of the cheesecake trend. The episode came to represent their animosity, regardless of whether Brando made a mistake on purpose or was simply caught in a difficult situation. Their chemistry was aptly represented. Everyone was on edge because of Sinatra's short fuse and Brando's unpredictable manner, which drove him into a rage. The cheesecake tale was always brought up as evidence of how much they hated cooperating, even years later, when people discussed their dispute. Even after the cameras stopped recording, they continued to fight. Offset, Sinatra and Brando tried to stay away from one another. Their mindsets and ways of living were diametrically opposed. Sinatra stood for the traditional entertainment industry. He appreciated polish, quickness, and professionalism. Originally from the nightclub scene, he was a firm believer in using a smile, a song, and a crisp delivery to immediately engage audiences. In contrast, Brando was regarded as the new face of acting. He took his work seriously, was inclined to realism, and was frequently aloof or reclusive. He didn't like Sinatra's ostentatious, slick style. He thought Sinatra was superficial and focused more on appearance than substance. Sinatra responded by dismissing Brando as arrogant, overly complex in his acting, and wasting time on pointless methods. This stylistic conflict developed into a more profound personal aversion. In private talks, Sinatra would vent about Brando, telling friends and co-workers that he was unable to tolerate him. For his part, Brando did little to conceal his disdain for Sinatra. He didn't appreciate Sinatra's acting skills and believed that his popularity was based more on appeal than merit, despite the fact that he hardly ever argued in public. Their animosity grew over time, to the point where Sinatra allegedly refused to be in the same room as Brando in his final years. Sinatra would look for excuses to avoid a function if he learned that Brando was going. The resentment remained constant. Because of the conflict between two very different egos and the recollection of guys and dolls, this animosity persisted longer than others that cooled with time. Because it involved more than just two individuals, the competition between Sinatra and Brando became one of the most talked about in Hollywood. It represented a broader change in the entertainment industry. Sinatra stood for the classic performers who were based on stage presence, song, and acting. Brando symbolized the emergence of contemporary method actors who prioritized emotional nuance and realism. It was more than simply a creative dispute when those two worlds collided. It was a conflict between cultures. Being made to share the screen with Brando after losing the role of Sky Masterson was a humiliating blow to Sinatra's self-esteem that never went away. Having to endure Sinatra's animosity further strengthened Brando's belief that the Hollywood establishment was out of date. Years of animosity and one of the most well-known beginning tensions in film history were the outcome. And this was just the start, as Sinatra would face John Wayne in his next major conflict. And it was more than simply a movie dispute. Politics and patriotism were at the center. John Wayne versus Frank. Two of the most well-known figures in America in the middle of the 20th century were Frank Sinatra and John Wayne. Both of them conducted themselves as leaders who were admired by millions of people, and they were idols in their respective areas. However, they were on different sides of the political and cultural spectrum, even if they were similarly famous and influential. In addition to their differences as individuals, their personalities clashed because of what they stood for. Sinatra and Wayne came to represent two Americas that frequently couldn't agree in a divided Hollywood. For a large portion of his career, Sinatra supported liberal politics despite his flaws and reputation for conceit. He was a major backer of John F. Kennedy during his 1960 presidential campaign and was close to the president. Sinatra gave Kennedy access to the largest donors and stars in Hollywood by opening his pocketbook, lending his name, and using his connections. Sinatra became a key player in Democratic Party circles as a result. In addition to politics, Sinatra was frank about civil rights. Sinatra utilized his position to speak out against prejudice, defend black singers, and advocate integration during a period when racial discrimination was still a severe reality. He frequently demanded that his fellow Rat Pack members, including as Sammy Davis Jr., be treated similarly and would not perform at venues that discriminated. Wayne, on the other hand, was solidly on the opposite side. Wayne, who was referred to by his admirers as the Duke, was a prominent figure in American politics in addition to being a screen hero in innumerable westerns and war films. He personified tough individualism, traditional values, and strong conservatism. Both guys ended up serving as lightning poles for the divisions inside Hollywood. Wayne represented conservative Hollywood, while Sinatra was frequently the public face of progressive celebrity-driven politics. Neither man was the kind to keep his thoughts to himself, so when their paths crossed, sparks flew. The Vietnam War was the most significant political struggle of their era. Wayne saw the conflict as a test of bravery and dedication. He was adamant that America had to get involved in Vietnam in order to thwart communism and demonstrate its might internationally. Wayne directed and acted in the unabashedly pro-war movie The Green Berets in 1968. It presented the war as a valiant struggle and portrayed American soldiers as heroes. Wayne vehemently defended the film, which was deemed unrealistic by critics at the time. Supporting the troops and suppressing what he perceived as defeatist sentiments were his patriotic obligations. Sinatra, however, adopted a different position. He was skeptical of the war itself, but he always had respect for the men and women who served in the military. He believed that there was no actual progress and that it was an unnecessary escalation that cost lives. He frequently supported the anti-war movement that was gaining traction across the nation and utilized his platform to voice his opposition to the ongoing conflict. When the veterans came home, Sinatra thought they should be supported. However, he did not support a war that he believed was foolish. This disagreement was not a trivial issue. Wayne believed that opposing the war equated to being unpatriotic. Blindly supporting the war means ignoring its human cost, according to Sinatra. Their disagreements over Vietnam became personal even if they were a part of broader Hollywood discussions. At events, the two men would exchange heated remarks, and others who witnessed the tension frequently recalled it. Sinatra would accuse Wayne of glorifying a conflict that was tearing the nation apart, while Wayne would accuse Sinatra of destroying American principles. One of their rivalry's most talked about incidents occurred at a Hollywood party. Sinatra and Wayne reportedly got into a furious dispute over politics and almost got into a fight. According to the legend, Wayne confronted Sinatra face-to-face over his vocal criticism of the Vietnam War, calling it un-American. Never one to back down, Sinatra retaliated with his own attacks, making fun of Wayne's oversimplified worldview. The conversation swiftly became heated. For a brief moment, it appeared as though fists may fly, and witnesses reported hearing heated voices. Those in their immediate vicinity had to intervene to prevent a full-scale altercation. Even though there was no physical violence during the disagreement, the memory of that night persisted. It turned into one of the best illustrations of how strongly they disliked each other. There were repeated reports of the two males yelling at each other. Tension was practically a given whenever Sinatra and Wayne were together at a private party, political fundraiser, or industry event. Neither could keep from voicing his opinions, and both possessed volcanic tempers. Their conflict was not kept secret. In various ways, the two men made fun of one another in public. During interviews, Sinatra would occasionally make fun of Wayne's politics and acting style. He would accuse Wayne of playing the same part in every film and brand him out of date. Wayne's acting had long been condemned as being limited, even by some of his fans, thus these remarks were intended to be hurtful. Wayne, on the other hand, wrote Sinatra off as a lightweight. He saw Sinatra as a spoiled vocalist with no real power to discuss important political issues. He believed that Sinatra's involvement was opportunistic and superficial, driven more by publicity than by sincere conviction. Wayne would sometimes make fun of Sinatra's political affiliations, implying that his association with the Kennedys was more about show than substance. They were contemptuous for decades. The resentment never completely went away, even as both men aged and Hollywood evolved around them. Wayne never acknowledged Sinatra as a legitimate political voice, and Sinatra never softened his opinion of Wayne's ideas. The conflict shifted from personal grievances to the symbolic meanings of each guy. They represented two very different Americas, one that held tenaciously to tradition and conservatism, and the other that welcomed change and liberal ideals. John Wayne and Frank Sinatra would never get along. They were fiercely at odds because of their pride, their tempers, and their ideals. Their conflict served as a sort of mirror for the wider rift in American culture in the 1960s and 1970s. Hollywood served just as a backdrop. The true struggle was over the course of the nation, and neither man was prepared to make concessions. Even though this feud was combustible, Sinatra's disagreement with Howard Hughes escalated it into a conflict involving money, casinos, and power. And that's where the real fireworks happened. Howard Hughes versus Frank. No one in the history of Las Vegas was more closely associated with the city than Frank Sinatra. The showrooms echoed with his speech. Billboards featured his visage. In the 1950s and 1960s, his rat gang added glitz and excitement to the comic. Sinatra solidified his reputation as more than just an actor and singer in Vegas. He rose to prominence there as a representation of strength and style. However, it was also in Vegas that Sinatra met Howard Hughes, the secretive millionaire who transformed the future of the city by purchasing casinos. Their feud swiftly turned into one of the most notorious conflicts in entertainment and industry as what had begun as a working relationship soured. Sinatra's kingdom was the Sands Hotel. Constructed in 1952, the Sands rapidly rose to prominence as one of Las Vegas' most significant resorts. It was no ordinary hotel. Rat Pack culture was centered there. There, Sinatra would perform night after night with Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. Their shows were hilarious, laid back, and packed with famous people. Sinatra received more than just a stage from the Sands. It made him feel like he owned the city. Sinatra meant the Sands, and Vegas meant Sinatra to the general public. Midway through the 1960s, Howard Hughes came into play. As a film producer, commercial magnate, and aviation pioneer, Hughes was already well known. However, he had grown more withdrawn by this point. In 1966, he relocated to Las Vegas and started purchasing real estate on the Strip. He had a straightforward plan. He desired authority. Hughes thought he could mold the city to suit his plans by owning several casinos. He quickly acquired the Sands itself, the Frontier, the Landmark, and the Desert in the Castaways. Sinatra and Hughes first appeared to be a perfect match. Both were strong men with reputations that were larger than life. Hughes valued having a celebrity of Sinatra's quality associated with one of his houses, while Sinatra relished the luxury Hughes could offer. On the inside, however, their personalities were headed for conflict. Sinatra was accustomed to getting what he wanted when he wanted it, but Hughes was fixated on rules and control. After Hughes acquired the Sands in 1967, things reached a breaking point. Sinatra had been given preferential treatment at the hotel for years. He had tabs for food and drink, limitless casino credit, and management's undivided attention. These advantages weren't merely bonuses to Sinatra, they were his right. In his perspective, the management owed him for whatever he brought in, and his presence at the Sands made the hotel famous. That was not how Hughes saw it. He prioritized business. An issue was discovered when Hughes's staff examined Sinatra's spending. Sinatra was accruing enormous debts for entertainment, gambling, and drink. After imposing stricter limitations, Hughes finally terminated Sinatra's credit. Sinatra could not take this as an insult. It is a renowned incident. When Sinatra was informed that his credit was closed, he reportedly walked out of the Sands in a rage. He criticized Hughes, shouted at management, and vowed never to come back. This meant more to Sinatra than simply forfeiting benefits. His pride was slapped in the face. It wasn't personal to Hughes. It was just business. However, that disparity in viewpoint set to one of the most well-known feuds in the Strip. Sinatra swiftly found a new residence at Caesar's Palace, which opened in 1966, after departing the Sands. Caesar's was keen to have Sinatra perform as the main act. Additionally, the resort became the focal point of Vegas nightlife as a result of the shift. Via taking his indicates to Caesar's, Sinatra now not best observed a new degree, however also struck back at Hughes. His presence helped Caesar's compete without delay with Hughes motels, pulling excessive rollers and celebrities far from the Sands. Hughes noticed this as an instantaneous assignment. The billionaire turned into no longer used to being defied, especially not through an entertainer. He and his crew worked quietly to make existence hard for Sinatra. There have been reports of whisper campaigns supposed to damage Sinatra's recognition in business circles. Hughes's corporate maneuvering additionally played a function in restricting Sinatra's opportunities at other residences Hughes managed. It had become a chilly warfare of impact with Sinatra the use of his reputation and connections to outshine Hughes at the same time as Hughes used his money and strength to try to field Sinatra in. For the town of Las Vegas, this feud became extra than non-public. It became part of a bigger battle over manipulate of the Strip. Sinatra represented the vintage Vegas of entertainers and mob-backed casinos where stars ruled the showrooms and loved unchecked privileges. Hughes represented the brand new Vegas, wherein organizations and businessmen had been starting to update the vintage guard. Their combat mirrored the changing face of the metropolis itself. The personalities of each guise made reconciliation impossible. Hughes turned into famously paranoid. With the aid of the past-due 1960s, he was living in near overall isolation, speaking via aides and refusing to appear in public. His health turned into deteriorating and his eccentric conduct grew greater excessive. He distrusted all and sundry he couldn't manipulate, and Sinatra's independence made him a consistent infection. Sinatra meanwhile became fueled by way of pride and a short temper. He did not forgive slights and he did no longer tolerate being instructed no. Hughes reducing off his credit score on the Sands became greater than a business choice to Sinatra. It became an embarrassment. His response became explosive, and from then on he stated Hughes with contempt. Sinatra reportedly called Hughes a ill man and told buddies he could in no way once more work for him. The feud became an image in their contrasting personalities. Hughes became secretive, calculating, and passionate about control. Sinatra became fiery and impulsive and demanded loyalty. Neither man changed into able to compromise, and so their conflict dragged on. For people who watched from the out-of-doors, it turned into a reminder that even within the glittering world of Las Vegas, egos and grudges dominated simply as an awful lot as money and repute. By the time Hughes retreated further into isolation in the 1970s, the feud had misplaced its urgency, however the awful blood never disappeared. Sinatra remained a star in Las Vegas until the cease of his profession, whilst Hughes's effect diminished as his fitness declined. But, their battle marked a turning factor inside the city's records. The days when entertainers like Sinatra held energy over the casinos had been fading, and the rise of company possession driven by figures like Hughes was reshaping the Strip into something new. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe so that you do not leave out Hollywood's wildest testimonies.